I know it's just one example of one school, but to me it does chart the kind of trajectory that we're going in, because this school also said that despite the fact that they're not having Easter celebrations, they are going to be celebrating Refugee Week. So they've swapped the Christian religion for the religion of multiculturalism.
You know, just thickness, it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Middle-class women, I'm sorry, not even the blokes, it's the mothers, surely.
Look, I've said this here many times before. If you want to solve the immigration crisis, you simply get old cruise ships, moor them in the English Channel, you pick up those migrant boats. If you don't turn them back, you put them on these ships so they never set foot on British soil. When the ships are full up, you sell them to the Ascension Islands, process them on a British overseas territory, no legal issues, and after a few of them are on a windswept island in the middle of the ocean.
Ostensibly it is a victory, and we should celebrate it, because Sussex University has just been fined well over £500,000. 99% of the staff at Sussex University are going to be thinking that we are the victims. This is terrible. Our poor trans students are in danger.
Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle, and as usual I am joined by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow and Royal Historian, Amy Gallagher of Stand Up to Woke, and Dr. Philip Kiszely, Senior Fellow and Cultural Historian. Before we talk about the various events of this week, Philip, anything about locals? Because obviously you're our national organiser now.
I am indeed, yes, and there are quite a few things happening. There's the regional conference on Saturday in Salisbury, which we're all going to, and I think which Dr. David Starkey is speaking at.
And Rafe, actually.
Yeah, we're all there. We're all speaking, aren't we? There's drinks in Lincoln on Saturday on the 29th. There's a meet-up in Bath on April the 1st. There's a meet-up in Sheffield as well on April the 1st, and that's with guest speaker Paul Selby. There's a tour of the Grand Jury Museum in Canterbury. That's on the 5th. And there's a meet-up in Canterbury on the 8th as well. There's also a meet-up in Brighton on the 8th. There's a meet-up in Carlisle on the 13th, and that's how civil wars start and how to stop them. There's a meet-up in Norwich on the 13th too, and that's EDI in the NHS, what you need to know. There's a meeting in Lincoln again on the 24th. That's their monthly meeting, and I'll be there. So if you're in Lincoln, please do come along and say hello. There's a meeting in Beaconsfield as well on the 24th, and Birmingham on the 27th. So there's lots going on. Please do email us at locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. All these events are free, and there's lots of stuff on the website too.
Great. This conference we've got on Saturday is called Magna Carta and the Making of the English.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a landmark for us, as I've said before, but it's the first locals conference. And so we will be having many more, because actually this one sold out pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's really exciting, I think. I'm really interested in getting much more regional activity, and the conferences are, I think, a really good way of doing that.
Absolutely. People meet and make friends. Anyway, we're going to start actually by something which might seem rather like one of those stories, yet another woke story, but actually is far more serious in some ways than that, Amy, isn't it? Can you lead us in?
Yeah, this is the story of a primary school in Hampshire that has recently written a letter that was sent out to all the parents of the school, saying that from going forward, they won't be conducting their usual Easter celebration. So they would have usually had an Easter bonnet parade, and they would have usually done an Easter service. But due to wanting to be inclusive and diverse, and to support inclusive religions, they've decided not to do it. I mean, I guess it's quite surprising that this is happening. I mean, there was a recent example of this in a school over Christmas that wrote to a parent saying that they weren't going to include Christmas in their pantomimes. But this seems to have taken it to another level, that you would actually stop Easter celebrations completely. And you need to remember that, I wasn't raised Christian, but I still got involved in Easter celebrations because you have Easter eggs, you have kind of Easter egg hunts, and it's not necessarily religious. It's just a kind of English tradition. And I'm very fond of memories of those celebrations. It's something, it feels like it's a part of my culture. So the fact that they are not just excluding kind of the religious element, but just Easter in general, any kind of Easter celebrations, feels to me like it's moved this on to the next step, actually. And to me, I know it's just one example of one school, but to me it does chart the kind of trajectory that we're going in, because this school also said that despite the fact that they're not having Easter celebrations, they are going to be celebrating Refugee Week. So they've swapped the Christian religion for the religion of multiculturalism. And how I see this, see what's happening is that Christianity is going to be pushed out, across the country, replaced with multiculturalism, which says there should be no religious festivals in the spirit of inclusion. And then I think what will happen the next stage will be that Islam will come in. That's how I see it happening, that Christianity will decline, and we're just supposed to accept that. And then the new religion will come in. And that's, to me, why this is so worrying, because it's not just one, it's just one school, but it does signify something, actually. And it begs the question, what are they going to do about Christmas? Christmas is a religious festival. Are they going to write to parents saying we're not celebrating Christmas? I was speaking to a friend recently just saying, I couldn't believe I was thinking this, but do you think in sort of 20, 30 years' time this country will still celebrate Christmas? And this is not a fault that I would ever have had, but you do start to think, what is this country going to look like in decades' time? And that's why this is so worrying.
Yeah. Apparently, the teacher, it has to be said, has written a letter, obviously been slightly shocked by this, and has written a letter slightly backtracking.
Right.
But not really, in a way, not really.
In the most mild way. I mean, look, they're still cancelling, for example, the Easter bonnet children's activity. I remember doing the Easter bonnets at school. It's completely devoid of any religious connection here whatsoever. I mean, reading this letter, you would think that Eastleigh perhaps is, sort of a minority white British or something. No, 85% white. This is, there is absolutely no grounds upon which this has any legs to stand. The Church of England is the established church in this country. Britain is a Christian country. The monarch is the head of the Church of England and defender of faith. And quite simply, everything must be done to protect our religious holy days and to observe them. And it is very much the thin end of the wedge. And the key thing here also in this letter, and this hasn't really been picked up enough, along with celebrating Refugee Week, the headmistress said that they were also striving to become a school of sanctuary. Now, I'd never heard this term school of sanctuary before. And this turns out to be one of these ESG, sustainable B Corp type badges. Like you get corporations having the Stonewall thing. This is a far left radical thing. If you subscribe to all of these values, these globalist values, then you get one of these things. And interestingly, I think one of the reasons that they may be banning Easter is because there are tens of thousands of pounds worth of grants that are allocated by the organization, supported by the Hamlin Foundation and others, if you subscribe to their set of core values, which would include undermining Christianity. So there's even actually every possibility that this was done deliberately in a hope of securing a grant of money, which makes it even more insidious.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
All about money, though.
It's all about money. I mean, when you read the statement or the letter she put out, you just see these words like alignment, values, those kinds of things. But if you look at it in a slightly broader context, this is akin to child abuse, because what it's doing is it's taking these children and it's stripping them of their heritage, of their history, of their culture, of their identity, okay? That collective social, cultural identity that children desperately need. And if you do that to people, just as you do that to a culture, then you make them fundamentally unstable. If we don't know where we come from, we are fundamentally unstable. That's just a psychological given. And it seems that we are doing this, or people like this are doing this to the culture at large. And surely they know what they're doing. This isn't just a mistake that they're doing that. They want to undermine things. Yes, it might be for very shallow things like money, but there's something else going on here as well, isn't it? It's this religion, as Amy says, of identity politics. But there's one more thing as well, which is really important, which most people haven't picked up on. In terms of outcomes for students, this school is struggling. It needs to do better. That's what Ofsted says. So I would say to that headmistress, not that she's listening, my God, but I would say to her, look, focus on education. Focus on looking after your children. Don't worry about getting a few pence from wherever it is, and put away the identity politics.
Don't you think, though, that this also gives you an idea of the general approach in all sorts of other areas?
Yes.
Probably. History teaching and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, the argument that the head teacher was making was that in order that she's trying to get rid of all religious festivals so that everybody can participate. And you've seen a similar argument with Kathleen Stock in the Michaela school, in that she was saying that because there's so many different cultures, she made the school vegetarian so that they would all eat the same food, because they had different diets depending on their culture or their religious beliefs. So it's a flattening of the culture, and it means that you get this kind of beige that nobody wants. And so in the case of this other school in Hampshire, that there's no religious festivals, which is really depressing. And what if you don't want to be a vegetarian, or what if you do want to express your religious beliefs? It means that at the moment, it means that kind of everybody comes out worse, actually. And as I said, I think that in terms of the demographics and the way the country's going, that eventually there will be a void, and that void will be filled with Islam.
Yeah, I mean, but I think your original analysis earlier is the correct one. I think that, at the heart of multiculturalism, it was never about being equally celebratory. It was always anti the host cultures, anti-Western. It was never about anything. What really irritates me, I get really angry about this, is that we can go until we're blue in the face. Where are the parents? I'm sorry, what are they doing about it?
Yeah. Well, even the parent that leaked this letter then apologized because he didn't realize the letter was going to go viral, and he was embarrassed, and he apologized for the Dick Storm. I would have been celebrating the fact that I had drawn attention to all this. But I'm curious as to whether they are going to suppress all other religious celebrations, because they have held assemblies for Eid, for Ramadan, for Hanukkah, for Diwali. Are those assemblies still going to go on? Because if they are going to go on, then you will have a legal case here for discrimination. Because the justification is that we want no one to feel offended or intimidated or awkward amongst celebrating the Christian religion. Well, if you're just going to discriminate against the Christian religion, then you are actually breaking the law. So there are good arguments here to be made as to how this is actually deliberately designed to not. And also, it has to be said, in the past, I remember when people were, who is behind this? Is it just the far left? Because quite often religious minorities are quite happy with their children celebrating the Christian religion. I remember when they asked the chief rabbi and leading imams whether they were offended by the fact that the Queen Elizabeth was the head of the church, and they said we'd rather have a person of faith than a person of no faith. So quite often this is coming from a very far left radical agenda.
It is, and it comes from this the framing of multiculturalism. At the centre of it is this decentering. So it's moving British culture, British identity to the side, and letting minority identities going to the middle, and they would say, oh well, we're so Eurocentric, so we need to put ourselves in the position of other people who are minorities, and it's all of this kind of stuff, and it comes from the 70s, it comes from Edward Said, it comes from this far left crank school of post-colonialism that nobody used to take that seriously a few years ago, and just a few years ago nobody did in the mainstream. It's only in the last 10, 15 years or so that this has become, like, you know, I hesitate to say it, but the new Bible, and it's extremely worrying.
How do you get parents to basically take direct action? I mean, protest a bit, you know, withdraw children from school, because you know, the nearest I've got to this was a family member. Her children were being taught all sorts of trans stuff, and the problem for her was that she took, you know, very measured, traditional way. She wrote to the school and everything. The problem was that the yummy mummies, I'm sorry, I don't care who's offended by that, just simply thought, well, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with telling people about, you know, just thickness? It drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Middle class women, I'm sorry, not even the blokes. It's the mothers, surely.
Yeah, I mean, some of the parents, as I understand it, did push back. They were making the point that, I mean, they put it on the school website. They were making the point that, you know, if some people are offended by Easter celebrations, they can just not go. And if you put on any kind of other religious ceremony, that our children could just not go to that, and we can all just choose. But, you know, it's come from a headmistress. I mean, to me, she's the one that's most responsible, other than the parents. And I guess the parents are just trying to, you know, they're worried about pushing back. We're not used to doing that in this country. I think we just don't have a culture of pushing back. You know, other religions, other cultures are often quite stronger in that regard, in that Muslims often do push when they need to push. But there's something about our culture and people in general in this country that I don't know if it's politeness or something, that they don't feel that there is a need to fight for these things. And maybe it's because they're not Christians themselves, or maybe they're lukewarm Christians. I mean, you know, we've kind of lost a belief in Christianity in general, that people sort of just, I don't think they realise the significance of it. They probably just think, oh, it's just one day, it's just one event, what does it matter? But they don't see the kind of encroachment longer term of what this means.
I'm sorry, they've got to wake up. I'm sorry, they've just got to wake up.
Well, I think that's all true, actually, but I think there's something else as well. I think many parents know how hostile, belligerent and bullying left-wing and radical left-wing parents will be. And it might be in their Facebook group or their little school community. They know that there are plenty of parents there who will be like that. And they just simply don't want their children to be singled out and bullied because, you know how radical left-wingers are. They will be saying to their children, oh, so-and-so is a racist, so don't associate with their children. That kind of thing happens all the time, I think. And there's that's just something to bear in mind. But I completely agree, Peter, with what you're saying and what Amy's saying as well. You do need to make a stand against these things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the time for English politeness and reserve has finished. We are facing an existential crisis, and our schools are actually the hotbed. As I said, you can't win the war on woke if you don't win the battle for young minds. Yeah. And to do that, parents need to adopt the tactics of the far left. We need to beat them at their own game, because it's always the vocal, organized minority who hold sway and domination over the majority. And if more parents, I think, are on our side on this sort of a thing. We had our conference a couple of years ago. I gave a speech there on education reform, and one of the things I said needs to be done is that conservative parents need to get on the boards of school governors, right, where they can hold teachers and the headmistress to account. There are things that can be done. There are, you can lobby in all sorts of ways. You can hold protests, do exactly what the left do it, and there are more on our side. And people need to, and the problem with the right is they're too busy with their lives to get involved in these sorts of issues normally. But we're at the point now where they actually need to have we all have a vested interest in this.
The thing is, though, it's like I mentioned this family member. She had a fight with one of these women. I have to relate this because it's kind of germane, really. Yeah. She had a fight with one of these women at the school gate. When I say fight, I mean a strongly worded discussion. And this other woman was saying, well, I think it's absolutely right that we should celebrate diversity and everything like this. This is in a beautiful rural area, quite expensive. And so my family member said, why didn't you go and live with them? Why didn't you go and live in where she'd come from, which is suburban London, because she's moved there. And And of course, the woman was outraged at this kind of crudeness.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Now, you can call that politeness. I would call that kind of a thick kind of bigotry, actually.
Snobbery, yeah.
A thick kind of bigotry. It makes me so angry. Sorry, but I mean, on this point, did you see on Twitter someone in some gym somewhere had put on a note, I think it might have been David Lloyd, one of those gyms, put a note saying, due to Ramadan, could you make sure that you are covered when you come out of the shower?
Oh, God.
God.
Pure Jim. I saw that.
It was pure gym.
And I don't understand what nudity has to do with Ramadan. I thought maybe they fancy some sausages or chipolata or something. That's the only thing I could think of, a lamb one, not a pork one. But you're absolutely insane that the rest of society has to somehow accommodate the needs of this fringe element in our society. Because,
Yes, but
You would never see anything like that being done for Christianity.
No, you just wouldn't. And especially pure Jim as well. It's a straightforward, I was going to say meat and potatoes, being too much Jim. But it's a very straightforward Jim. You wouldn't think they would be taking all of that kind of stuff on. So in a way, that illustrates just how insidious this stuff is.
Oh, yes, but also, sorry, again, it's probably someone on the desk or in there who's just sort of thought, oh, Ramadan, or they don't like nudity or something, that vague, I better put up some kind of sign. People have got to wise up. I mean, sorry, it's just like Brexit. The wonderful thing about Brexit was ordinary people, working class people, went out, and I know this anecdotally for a fact, and actually found out about what the EU meant. They went to their local libraries. You're not going to get any education from the media on this. No. You've got to go out and find what this is about.
But that's a really good point, actually, because it's only, 10, 12 years ago, but it was much more difficult then to find out information. It was much more difficult. Now it's so easy. There's this channel, all the stuff that we publish, very definitely focused on all of this thing. There are other places as well. So it's not difficult. It's just that the right, the conservatives generally tend to not bother or don't want to be bothered with the detail. And it's the devil, of course, is in the detail. They need to know what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So they need to know what's happening in the schools. They need to know what's happening in the classrooms. It isn't just political correctness gone mad. We're way beyond that now. We're way beyond that.
Yeah, but you see, I don't even think it is, sorry, I'm like a dog with a bone here. I don't even think it is actually just conservative parents or conservative people. It's the ordinary people who I don't know how they vote. They've just got to wise up, because we talk about this kind of thing all the time and we get very hot under the collar. And what is the big component that's missing? Reaction to this. Reaction. We react. Right, but it's got to be from the people saying, actually, excuse me, but what is this sign doing up here by the showers? Why is it there? Why should I change my habits? I'm sorry, I'm taking it down. What's the matter? In come the police or whatever. Okay, we have a case. They end up on this show. Right, fair enough. But something has got to happen here. And
I think if people
shall calm down.
Well, no, it's a really good point. And I think we should get exasperated about this. And if people are worried about taking these things on, if people are actually thinking about these things but actually doing and saying nothing, right, then they need to get involved with like-minded people, and they need to I don't want to just blatantly push locals, but it's an obvious thing. It's an obvious thing, isn't it? If you feel as though you don't know what to do because you're worried about what's happening to your children at school, or something terrible's happening to you at work, get in touch, because there are like-minded people here who will tell you what to do. And I'm not just talking about us. I'm talking about the thousands of people who are signed up to locals and who will help you.
And in fact, our Dorset's local branch is actually currently engaged on trying to push back against the Islamophobia blasphemy law, which is great to see.
They put something on Twitter, or you put it on Twitter, didn't you?
I was retweeting them because they're doing excellent work there. So you can do it even on your local level. You may feel powerless, but and it's precisely these sorts of issues. A local school, which should actually be the grounds for a local branch to actually get organised and get local people motivated.
And also, just to finish this bit on, I mean, when people say, it's not like we're trying to get at people or anything like that, but one of the criticisms we have, if I can just be a bit self-serving, is that we're a talking shop, right? So this is a good example where you don't need to be a talking shop. you know, you've just got to find out about it.
It's community, it's support, it's action, it's lobbying, it's all of those things together.
Anyway, to the root of the matter, actually now, Rafe, this is about a new idea for a migrant hub, right?
Another day, another idea to solve our migrant crisis, and this is the Labour Party, which of course immediately dropped the Rwanda scheme, whereby anyone who came to Britain's shores would be immediately sent to Rwanda. That was the Tory plan. Labour immediately dropped it, and instead they've come up with a radically new idea, which is to send them instead to the Balkans, which makes you wonder why they didn't just, given that we've built everything, all the infrastructure is now in Rwanda, which Germany and the EU may now actually use our own buildings that we paid £700 million for. They're choosing to do this in the Balkans, particularly having seen the Italians have some success doing this in Albania. The problem with this scheme is it's not going to deter that many people, because once you arrive here, you have to exhaust your asylum claim. That's a big difference. The Tory version was to send you off immediately to Rwanda. This is no, go through all the process, or through the courts and everything else. Only once you've exhausted everything will you be sent over to the Balkans, and for every person that they send to the Balkans, they will pay the Balkans to take those people. That may lead to 60,000 people going there, but I'm sorry, we have 250,000 cases in this country. That's not going to be a deterrent, because actually, if you're coming from the Congo, the Balkans is actually quite a nice destination anyway. It's not a bad second booby prize, is it? Whereas Rwanda is not a very nice prize, I would imagine, for most people. Look, I've said this here many times before. If you want to solve the immigration crisis, you simply get old cruise ships, moor them in the English Channel, you pick up those migrant boats. If you don't turn them back, you put them on these ships so they never set foot on British soil. When the ships are full up, you sell them to the Ascension Islands, process them on a British overseas territory, no legal issues, and after a few of them are on a windswept island in the middle of the ocean, the message will get out that this is not a way you're going to succeed, because they'll never ever come to British territory. And then you make Britain just less attractive than France, so you essentially cut all benefits, you empty all the hotels of migrants, those who are already here, you put them in refugee camps up in the Orkneys, and you clamp down on the underground economy, the curry houses, the delivery companies, and you clamp down on rogue landlords so that they don't have 10 people living in any rooms. You do all of that, people will stop coming.
I mean, what this sounds to me is that this idea that they have to exhaust all their claims, their asylum claims, before they are sent to the Balkans. To me, that's really worries me, because we know that we're far greater, than other areas in Europe of accepting asylum claims. And, like, for example, the case of Abdul-Azidi, where he committed multiple crimes and then just said he was converting to Christianity, and just on that basis he was accepted and he wasn't deported. So what worries me about this is that it's even worse. It's far worse than the Rwanda plan. I mean, we spent years talking about Rwanda and how mild it was, and how it just wasn't enough as a deterrent. But compared to Rwanda, this is just nothing. It's far worse. It won't act as a deterrent. Rwanda was squashed by the courts and the human rights laws, but it did have this idea that you would send people immediately to Rwanda while their claim was being processed. But now with this plan, people will be here, their claim will be being processed, and they have to exhaust all avenues, which for me, that just means years of processing.
It's years. It's years. But I mean, with the ECHR, we're involved with, there's no way that anybody's ever going to get there.
Yeah.
And it's much more complicated than they're allowing us to think. Because, for example, there are 15,000 foreign-born criminals in and around our communities, our cities and towns right across Britain. Okay, 15,000 at large. So what are we going to do with those? Are we going to get those first? Are we going to take them out? Because they are definitely very much, they should go first and foremost, okay? That's going to cost millions and millions to get them. And then, of course, our friends, the very good friends, the human rights lawyers, immediately when all of the avenues are exhausted after years and years and years, then, of course, there's going to be the chicken nuggets defense, or it's this right to family life, which is the obstacle, and it's the ECHR. We need to get out of that immediately and then do all of the things that Rafe says, which is absolutely sensible. The incentive needs to go. That's the problem. The incentive is there.
But these, I mean, look, yeah, absolutely, we should leave the ECHR, but we don't even need to do that. This is what we do, we just need to get rid of the Human Rights Act. That was a piece of Labour legislation. Why the Tories didn't do that for 14 years, beggars belief and speaks volumes about their true intent, their true conservative credentials. But all you need to do is just ignore the ECHR. Yes. There's no mechanism by which the ECHR, international law is meaningless. There is no effective way that they can actually enforce any ruling or any judgment. The Danes, for heaven's sake, who've been so successful in reducing illegal immigration, they will haul before the ECHR at least a couple of times, and they basically just thumb their noses at them. I don't see why we always feel as if we have to abide by international law.
Yes, exactly. And, it's interesting that Douglas Carswell, I interviewed him this week, he came up with this proposal. It's called Milestones. It's basically trying to save Britain. But he makes the point that ECHR notwithstanding, you've just got to fire activist judges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even with or without that legislation, if they're determined to, they can thwart and they can, and that basically he was making the claim actually that most of our judges now are of this mindset.
I was going to say, that's a long firing line.
Yeah. Well, no, but isn't this what's got to happen? A new state. Yeah. A new state.
Well, it's reversing the long march through all of our institutions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's radical conservatism. We're beyond just kind of gentle activism. We really need to dismantle all of this stuff because as much as anything, it just grinds things to a halt. And these people will be here for years and years and years, and they will, by hook or by crook, somehow they will get through the system. That's the time is the problem. Okay, they will somehow or other they will get through the system, and that's what we're fighting against. And so, if we've got 200, what is it? 250,000 cases that are in review at the moment. Okay. Housing, where are they going to live? It isn't just hotels, is it? The new Labour policy of affordable public, all of that is going to be filled up by migrants, illegal and otherwise. It's just an absolute catastrophe. None of it's thought through. We're in trouble.
But there's also good news.
If
you could have a sudden mood shift. This is in relation to free speech and a victory, which there has been a victory, or should we say, in kind, in Sussex University.
Yeah, it is, and ostensibly it is a victory, and we should celebrate it because Sussex University has just been fined well over £500,000. For it relates to Kathleen Stock. Viewers will remember Professor Kathleen Stock, who was gender critical. And she was hounded out of Sussex University for her beliefs and for her insistence on telling the truth. The problem with this is, as I use the word ostensibly, because on the surface, this is great. We've won, okay? And hopefully it'll open the floodgates and other cases will now be brought, but I'm not sure that will happen. What we're getting immediately, the university has put in an appeal, all right, and they are saying this is terrible. We are the victims. In other words, they've turned it on their head and they're doing what they always want to do. Now, you can bet your life that 99% of the staff at Sussex University are going to be thinking that we are the victims. This is terrible. We're not allowed to express ourselves, our identity, our poor trans. There's a lot of trans people, I would imagine, in Sussex University. Our poor trans students are in danger, all of those things. So they are just turning reality on its head. They become the victims and they really love being the victims. Okay, so the woman who's been bullied, pushed away, and now lives in America, I think, Professor Kathleen Stock, okay, they are making out that that she's the villain of the piece here and that they are the victims. I'm sorry to put this spin on it, but having worked in universities in the sector, several Russell Group universities for a very long time, I just know precisely what's going on in these meetings and what's going on in these seminar rooms. And for me, that's my take.
Who's fining? Who imposes the fine?
It's
Office for Students.
Yeah. Students.
And they are what?
Well, we're a Quango, as they're set up, and finally we have a Quango on our side, miraculously enough. And they're the ones who have they seem to have swallowed the same pill as Donald Trump in America. And they were actually, hats off to them. We're often criticizing all of these things. Hats off to them. And actually, I'm pleasantly surprised by the woman I detest most in Parliament, and that's Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, who has a very, radical left agenda herself. But she's come out and actually write it in support of...
Well, they act as the sector regulator, basically.
Yeah, but they're led by Arif Ahmed, who is a philosophy professor at University of Cambridge, but he's very on our side. He's conservative-leaning and he believes in freedom of speech. I think that's why this has gone through. So it's good in that respect. But it is worrying, I agree with Philip, about the response from the Vice-Chancellor, because in her response she relied on all of the kind of buzzwords of woke and that... In having to review their trans and non-binary policy, it would put trans people at risk. It would put them at risk of abuse and bullying, of the bullying of minorities. No reference to the fact that Kathleen Stock, as a lesbian professor, was herself a minority and was bullied out because of her views in same-sex relationships. They don't seem to see the irony in that. But I mean, I think what is good about this is that this idea of that they're going to have to review this trans and non-binary policy. These kind of policies are not just widespread across universities. They're in the NHS, they're in the police, they're in all sorts of institutions, and they usually get their kind of wording from charities like Stonewall, and it gets substantiated into policy. And what it does is it means that if you disagree with trans ideology or gender ideology, you're disagreeing with policy. So if in the case of Sussex University, they were saying, we understand that people have a biological sex and that doesn't necessarily match with their gender identity. We understand that non-binary people exist. They even said that there was a requirement of the university to make sure that course materials represented trans people in a positive way. So this is not a privilege that's afforded to any other group. There's no other group where you say you have to talk about these people in a positive way. So it did mean that people like Kathleen Stock literally could not say that men can't be women. That you could not assert the truth. So it is positive in that respect, because hopefully other universities will look at this and say, well, we need to review our trans policy then, because a lot of them, they just cut and paste, what's written, and they all just follow, fall into line with these policies.
I agree, but I think de facto, most other groups are actually spoken about in only positive ways. I mean, in a university, you're never going to get a black woman spoken about negatively, unless she's overtly conservative and So it's the same with gay people with disabilities or something like that. There are certain groups like white people and, whiteness studies we were all talking about a few years ago, weren't we, where, they're there to be criticised. They're the punchbacks. But I suppose my point is, you can't do this in a top-down way. You can't deal with these people and say, look, you need to think differently. This is how you've got to act. This is how it's going to be. What you need to do is just get rid of the people and put other people in there. That's the only way things are going to change. So when I talk about this idea of radical conservatism, that's what I mean. It's the Trumpian thing.
I think that, well, yes, following on from that, it's this idea that having a list of policies, however good and attractive, is no longer enough. That, in fact, you've got to change the whole way in which we're governed, and indeed rethink the whole way what we are. And
that's why it's encouraging to see things like Snow White fail, and to see Bud Light and Harley Davidson change their policies. But that's actually just, that's just icing on it's so superficial. This is so deeply entrenched and embedded through all of our institutions. This is a 25 to 30 year project. It's a generational project. It took that long for this cancer to seep into our institutions. It will take just as long to cure it.
Absolutely it will. Well, look, fellas, and, sorry, ladies and fellas, we're going to carry on, actually, talk a bit about, well, St. Paddington of Bear, because that is a story that's taken up a fair amount of time this week. If you become a member, you can sort of carry on and, listen in. But in the meantime, thanks very much. Thank you very much to Rafe, to Amy, and to Philip. And we shall see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye. Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programmes, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.